Is it 5:02?
Yeah, we're done. Oh, 4:02. I think we're done.
Okay, I'm going to call to order this meeting of the City of Tallahassee Ethics Board. It's 4:02 on November 21st, 2017. We are in the City Commission Chamber in City Hall. And the first item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Does anyone have any edits, corrections, additions, deletions?
I wasn't here, but I have reviewed them.
Ms. Phillips moves to approve the minutes. Dr. Grant seconds, to his surprise, but with a nod. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign, and the minutes are approved. The next item on our agenda is the Ethics Officer Report, and again, we will go through this as we usually do, one item at a time, so we'll have 5 different pieces of this. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you're recognized on your summary of actions.
All right, Mr. Chair, as usual, this summarizes my activities in the month after we met in the month of October. So these included our workshop with the City Commission on the proposed ethics ordinance. It included a workshop on crime, City Commission meetings, community activities, ethics education to council on the status of women and girls, and various other tasks over the course of the month.
Okay, I would point out the item on the City Commission workshop on ethics. We will get to that in more detail on item 8 on our agenda. And also at the top of the second page, I note that you have reviewed public records requests. I would like to suggest to the board, if somebody wants to do this as a motion, we can do it, but I don't know that we can or cannot, but I would like to suggest to the board that we amend our bylaws or direct Julie to get copies of all of the public records requests that are made to the city, because it seems to me that as we talk about taking a little bit of a proactive stance, that's an opportunity for us to mine a little bit, not necessarily get copies of all the responses, but just get copies of the requests. And if she sees anything in there that looks like it might be untoward, she can either pursue it or she can put it before us and we can direct that it be pursued in more detail.
Mr. Chair? Thank you.
Ms. Phillips.
Can she just do that as part of her responsibilities? Do you mean just a monthly or just a daily activity?
Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
I've been doing this probably for about the last month, so I consider it part of my responsibilities, and I've worked closely with city staff to make sure I get copied on all of them, so I'm doing it.
Okay, I would like to make sure that it is at the direction of the board, right, so that if there were ever a situation where there was something questionable, that the result would always be that she gets access.
Mr. Chair, I suggest that we consider adding that to her responsibilities on our job description.
Okay. I'm seeing nods. We'll just do that administratively. I don't know that we need a motion, but we'll go that direction and make sure that when you approach the city, they understand that you're doing that at the request of the board. This is not just some great, although it is a great idea you had, we have given it the official board seal of approval.
I appreciate that support, Mr. Chair, and I do think it's a good barometer of what's going on in the city. So,
okay, the next item is the monthly tracking report.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have 3 items, actually 2 new items. and one that's a holdover from last month. So if you would like for me to start with number 115.
Yeah, let's do them individually.
Okay, perfect. You'll recall that last month we addressed a complaint about a newspaper publisher asking for waiver of public record request fees. And due to the timing of that complaint, there wasn't ample time for the research to be done to come up with a sound recommendation. So since that complaint came in, I've had the opportunity to review the definition of lobbyists. I have consulted briefly with Mr. Currington and the chair on the interpretation of the word lobbyists, and the conclusion is that I would like to recommend closure of it because the publisher does not fit the legal definition of a lobbyist. I will also add, in addition to that, that the commission at its last meeting voted to provide a second batch of public records for free. So it's actually a larger batch than the first batch that's more expensive. So the city's going to provide those free and is going to put them online so the public can review those. They've also acted, the commission has also acted to put online the records obtained from the first request. So the publisher has not yet been paid back for the initial expenditure to get the first batch, so I don't know how that will turn out. But the bottom line is that there's another big batch that's getting released for free, and the publisher did not fit the legal definition of a lobbyist. Therefore, my recommendation is to close it.
Okay, I'd like to ask Mr. Currington to weigh in on this, but I do want to point out that what we're talking about here is lobbying as it's defined in the city ordinance. State law defines lobbying before the legislature in 11045, lobbying before the executive branch in 112.3215, and reporting of gifts from lobbyists in 112.3148. Those are all under the state law and not specifically applicable to us, but within the context of the ordinance, there are definitions of both lobbying and lobbyist. And Mr. Currington, if you'd like to give us a nickel tour on those.
I know I sound like a broken record, but until and unless the City Commission adopts Chapter 112, we don't even really need to read Chapter 112 in terms of this body's authority to adjudicate. So I agree with Julie. In this case, it doesn't matter what the definition of lobbyist is under 112. That could all change if the city simply says we adopt the definition of lobbyist under Chapter 112. But they have not, and under the city's definition of lobbyists, I concur with Julie.
Okay. I would like to suggest to the board this might be something the next time we do an evaluation for recommendations to the City Commission, we might look at how they define. They talk about lobbying is basically trying to encourage or discourage passage, defeat, modification, or repeal of any item that may be presented for a vote before the City Commission. So something like the fees for public records wouldn't normally go to the City Commission, but we know in this case they did have a discussion of these fees. So that may be is a little vague. And then they also, the definition of lobbyist says a person who's employed for the purpose of lobbying, and that
defines the definition.
That's a pretty specific thing. So if your job is 35% lobbying and 70% something else, I don't know if you're employed for the. I'm just not sure that it's as clear as it might be in every case. And I think while it may not be a ethics violation today, it might be something that we want to look at in the future, just to make sure that as these kinds of situations occur in the future, we're really clear. I would never want to capture, if a guy's got a truck and is doing deliveries in Tallahassee and he gets pulled over for a traffic violation, and he asks the officer if he can get a warning instead of a ticket, I would hope that would never be considered to be lobbying, even though it's in the interest of his business. But somewhere in here you cross the line. And I'm not sure that I can, maybe Mr. Currington could do it, but I'm not sure I could find the line in the existing ordinance very clearly. And I'm getting a clear shake of the head no down there. So is there anybody who objects to closing this item? Okay, seeing nobody jumping out of their chair, item 116, Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
Number 116 is a complaint alleging a citizen was barred from an event that was invitation only, held in the community. So it is a building that is generally open to the public. They had a soft opening that was by invitation only, and this gentleman came and sought to be admitted to the facility, and there were police officers there, off-duty police officers, and he was not permitted to enter the building. So he called to say that he felt like he was being retaliated against by the CEO of the organization. Subsequently, he received a letter from that entity's attorney giving him basically a trespass warning. They were having a grand opening for the public, and he was told, if you come onto this property, this is your trespass warning, and you'll be asked to leave. So what I did in relationship to this complaint is I did verify that it was invitation only. I have a copy of an invitation I failed to bring into the chamber, but I have one in my desk that was issued to everyone that they wanted to attend. There was a woman that accepted RSVPs. I called the woman who accepted the RSVPs and was in charge of the list. I reviewed policies and procedures regarding the use of off-duty police officers, because that's where the city would come in, right? So in case anyone's unclear, what does this have to do with the city? There were off-duty police officers doing crowd control and security at the event. So the bottom line is, I also spoke with the CEO of the facility about it, and he explained that although the building's open to the public, it's privately owned. So they didn't want disruption at the property. When police are off duty, this is something they do quite often. They're needing to have specific qualifications to have off-duty work allocated to them, certain levels of experience. They have to have good evaluations, and notably, they're supposed to follow the general orders. That's what I guess the police call their policies and procedures. They have general orders. So they are to follow the law in terms of appropriate police tactics. So I'm recommending at this point that we close this, because I don't see that it violates anything over which this board has control.
Comments, questions? The only concern that I had was, if I hire an off-duty police officer, I get on my premises for my whatever event, they would certainly have the power and duty to enforce the law. I've always been a little unclear about how much they have to take, as I'm just a private citizen, I've hired these officers off duty, how much they have to do what I ask them to do, whether it's excluding somebody from attendance, or, helping clean up, or, moving a semi from one location to another. I mean, at some point, I can't ask them to do anything. Are the policies, do they provide any clarity on just how far the police officer can be asked to go in terms of doing things that are not enforcement of the law?
He or she is supposed to act as a police officer while they're there. So lift this heavy box or help stage this area. That's not something you can ask a police officer to do. Like, so while they're patrolling or while they're there, I reviewed this policy. They're supposed to be in radio contact with the patrol area supervisor. So whoever's in charge of like the patrol of that geographic area, they have to be tuned into that radio to find out if there's any incidents going on there. So basically what I guess the businesses are doing is they're paying to have a police presence there that otherwise the police department may not be able to provide based on available resources. So they're not there to do anything really other than to keep peace and keep it orderly. And I know at this particular facility there were some safety concerns because the sidewalk is torn up and it's not completed. So there was some concern also about guest safety. And I did verify there was a list of people that were invited and the list was checked. This individual argued, well, some people got in without holding an invitation in their hand, but I felt like that was a red herring because...
No offense taken.
No. Oh, gosh. I didn't even...
Slow today.
I'd forgotten that.
Sure, that's not the first time he's heard that one.
Okay, sorry. So anyway, I'm recommending closure of the complaint, notwithstanding the unintentional jab at the chair.
Okay, any comments, questions, concerns? Anybody object to closing this? Okay, item 117.
Okay, finally, item number 117 was a complaint that came into the hotline. It did not come in on the 134th day of November. I note that's a typo, so I believe it's the 13th. So strike that 4. But this was an anonymous complainant who called regarding P-card usages, and also there was an alert given to a supervisor about this P-card misuse, and this caller was concerned about the supervisor following up appropriately. So since this is an issue of potentially fraud, waste, or abuse, as well as ethics, I did consult with the auditor. A review of the audit plan for 2018 indicated that fortuitously a P-card audit was placed on the audit schedule. So in cooperation, the auditors agreed to prioritize that audit, and this particular issue will be captured there. And in point of fact, staff is already working on that issue.
Okay.
So what I'm recommending is that this issue be kept, or this case be kept open, pending the completion of that audit, at which time the board will get a report. Now, in the meantime, if it's determined that there's ongoing fraud, waste, or abuse of a P-card, the auditor can refer this matter to law enforcement or other authorities. So it's not like the money'd be wasted as we wait for the audit to be completed.
Okay. Ms. Phillips.
Who oversees P-card use in the city?
Overseas, let's see, I do know that there's an approval process, and is that Raul, Bert? Yes. Department heads.
Right, so, right. We started using the P-card. We were the first ones with the Department of Banking and Finance. But, so I'm real familiar with this, but, I mean, the supervisor was notified. Is there anything being done currently? I mean, you said that you talked to someone, but are they doing anything about this particular maybe misuse currently?
Without getting into the specifics of the issue, this is on a radar, and it is being reviewed and looked at. This is an issue that's familiar to the auditor.
I guess that's not quite what I'm asking.
Let me recognize the auditor, and we're going to stay on your question.
What I understand, there's an allegation from an employee that allegedly there may be a supervisor involved. Until we get into it, we don't know if anything has happened. All we know is the call, and we're doing the preliminary work to try to figure out if maybe there's something to this to where we need to jump on into it. But once we get going, and we're kind of going as an audit, and once we start the audit, is like I always tell you, it becomes all confidential.
That's why I'm asking
The
now.
only person that knows about this is the employee, so to speak. We haven't met with any, I'm not going to name departments or anything like that. We're just trying to get the information so we can get going and see if it looks like there's something to this or not.
And I haven't even confirmed, because the person didn't want to share, whether they are an employee. So I don't even know that. This is how anonymous it was. The person didn't want to give any identifying information at all. So
We have enough information, though, just enough information to know
where to look.
Area, pretty specific area to start looking.
Ms. Phillips.
So you will probably you may report back before the audit is complete, because if you find that the allegation is true in your preliminary work, then you may.
Well, I've got to, I'll have some decisions to make as the auditor as to whether, there's all kinds of scenarios that you can go to. If there was a fraud,
That's my point.
I would act on that immediately. If it's not a fraud, but an abuse, I will certainly communicate that with the appropriate level of management to get it addressed. But it would not be addressed publicly, so to speak, until I completed the audit. We completed the audit and issued the report. So we have to follow our standards and the statutes.
Okay, I guess that's what I was getting at. If, you can't wait. If there's fraud occurring, you can't wait till after the audit is complete. That would be.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's what I was getting at, because that's what the report says when the audit is complete.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right,
Absolutely.
thanks.
Yeah, just a quick comment, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I actually think it's a good action. Something comes to the ethics board, ethics officer gets it in the right channels, and it gets addressed. So I think that's good news, number one. Number two, having worked with P cards and those types of things, that is a management/leadership responsibility, and it's delegated to folks, and it needs to be checked on. And I would hope, because this already has publicity in the paper, that this is the kind of thing that the city would take a look at and say, hey, it's the kind of thing that precipitates, okay, all you managers, you have people with P cards, make sure they're using them the right way. Here are the rules, review regulation such and such, and make that happen. So anyway, good comment, so thanks for doing that, Julie.
Okay. I would also point out that we are hopeful that the City Commission is going to adopt several of our recommendations concerning expanding our jurisdiction, and one of those being misuse of position. I think this is the kind of thing that could actually at some point fall directly within our jurisdiction, which today it probably doesn't. So this is going to stay on the list. We will see it again. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, next up.
A board member, and it's escaping me at this moment in time, asked that there be an accounting or a provision of information of matters that I have referred for handling by other areas of the city and the outcomes of those. So we compiled this list, so that's what this is. So you can see, for example, one that was referred to code enforcement, and it involved weeds and plants. And Some of them, you can tell, are clearly not within the jurisdiction of the board. Some of them were appropriate for, say, the Attorney General's fraud office. And some things had nothing to do with the city at all, and they thought they were calling the Commission on Ethics about Pinellas County. So I think the board member was just concerned that matters that were referred were followed up on and appropriately closed, and that nothing was left hanging there. And I apologize for not remembering the board member who requested that, but that's the reason you have this information today.
Okay, and you're going to be providing us with this on a regular basis?
If desired.
I would say go ahead and do it.
You don't need these again, though.
No,
Okay.
and I think we would deal with these only by exception if you have a list, if there's anything that anybody wants, when we won't go through them one by one, but if anything, there's anything anybody wants to ask about, again, potentially if our jurisdiction expands, there may be some things that where we do have the authority to do something that today we don't. Next on your list.
Okay, the next item you should have,
This is personnel policy.
this is personnel policy number 706, and it's sub-I there on outside employment. And it just substantiates or proves that they have incorporated the outside employment tracking piece that we have recommended. So in number 4 there on the policy, you'll see a link to the outside employment form. And then on the flip page there, you'll see our city at work, the City of Tallahassee Human Resources and Workforce Development. You'll see the form there that the city's keeping on PeopleSoft, and the fields to be filled in by the employee. So it is the employee's responsibility on an ongoing basis to update this form should they have outside employment.
And who reviews the information that the employees input?
Well, at this point, we are capturing the information for reference if needed, and it's part of a job requirement that they fill it out. So that may be a good discussion piece. Do we periodically, as part of, say, an employee's evaluation, want to check and see if this is updated, if they have outside employment? But I think the main concept that the board was concerned with was just that we know who is working where, and that the employees understand that if, for example, they are working a second job and they haven't filled the form out, and we find out they've been working somewhere else, and especially if there's a potential conflict, there's a consequence for not filing the form. But of course, the board can direct additional recommendations about this.
Ms. Phillips.
I thought that the supervisor was supposed to review the form and determine whether or not there was some conflict with their city job. Is that not the case? I don't see that in here, but I thought that that's what we talked with Ellen about when we met with her. But I don't see it in here, but then I'm not sure that we have all the information. So if that's not the case, that I would certainly recommend further discussion that at least the supervisor review it to determine, or somebody needs to review it, HR, to determine whether or not there's a conflict of interest before the employee continues the employment.
Okay.
I know that's the way the state does it.
Right, and you're absolutely right. I had the job of reviewing all those and approving them, but in number 4 here, we do reference.
You're on number 4 on the Our City at Work
Yes.
page. Okay,
Yes.
go ahead.
This doesn't necessarily cover the whole issue referenced by Board Member Phillips, but it does say that the city employees, to avoid conflicts of interest, are required to report. But there probably should be an addition in there that the supervisor be also notified. So if that's your recommendation, I'll further that on.
It was
Right.
during our meeting, and I continue to recommend that,
Okay.
yes.
I would agree. Is there anybody else who has a comment on that or any objection to going down that path? Ms. Meadows, keep going down that path? It might not always be the supervisor. It could be a small department. It could be the department head and jump over some supervisory folks who are, maybe more hands-on than they are supervisory, depending on the nature of the unit. But periodically, somebody, it seems, ought to review that as opposed to just waiting for
It should.
a problem to occur and then being able to say, gotcha, because you didn't fill out a form or whatever. We are on the budget.
Okay, well, and then just to complete that last item, there was an email also included that incorporated our other recommendations related to gifts and to financial disclosure. So, and the budget is the next item, and I didn't really have any extraordinary expenses this last month. We have been utilizing our council.
Okay. Comments, questions, concerns? Okay, the ethics moment. Ms. Meadows, Keefe, I think you're going to talk to us about a couple bills that are up before the Florida legislature.
I am, and usually I pick things, and this is a board chair recommendation for the month. So usually I try to be more lighthearted and funny. But this,
Saying the Florida legislature is not lighthearted and funny?
gosh, it depends on the day, I guess. But this is a proposed committee bill coming out of the Integrity and Ethics Committee of the Florida House. And what you'll see is the speaker continuing his emphasis on ethics reform statewide. And the first proposed committee bill, 1801, talks about solicitation of employment when entities are in public office or employed. So they're not supposed to be using that office to solicit employment from, say, contractors that they're doing business with. There's also a requirement that they would report offers of employment from contractors. There's more disclosures of prohibited solicitations and other requirements. You'll note the last bullet repeals a statute strictly regulating legislative lobbying by state agency, state university, and community college personnel. So it seems like they're maybe trying to loosen that a bit more to allow those entities to more effectively ask for funding, most likely. And then it does expand the jurisdiction of the Commission on Ethics to investigate disclosures of certain prohibited solicitations in the same manner as a ethics complaint. I don't know if it talked about whether it would have to be sworn or unsworn. The next proposed bill is 1802. And again, the House Speaker is emphasizing ethics requirements and heightening those standards for those in local government. So I think this is the second year, at least, for that. So if you are a mayor or a city commissioner in a municipality with $10 million or more in total revenue, and I'd say that probably covers a lot of cities, there is going to be a requirement, if this passes, that those individuals file full and public disclosure of their financial interests. So that would be, I guess, the Form 6, where you're basically communicating your tax return. And talks about conflicts of interest and electronic registration of lobbyists, and requiring a person who wishes to lobby certain governmental entities to register as a lobbyist with the Commission on Ethics. So it seems like they would be expanding some of the functions of the Ethics Commission with both of these.
Okay. I suggested Julie cover these because I think there may be within this some ideas for the next time that we do our evaluation and make recommendations. I know there's already been an amendment filed to 1802 to talk about how public officials participate in public service announcements.
Right.
So if the Tampa Airport wants to have a high-level official do their public service announcements, is that really a gift? Is it campaigning in a sense, or is it the public official doing the public's business? That all gets interesting. But food for thought, we'll have to watch how these progress. And does that end? Okay, we are on agenda item 5, public comment on agenda items. I have Dr. Jackson. I have you on number 5. You're recognized, sir.
All right, thank you, sir. Irwin Jackson, 1341 Jackson Bluff. I'm passing out a article that was written by Steve Stewart back in November 18th, 2013. I don't know if you folks were involved with discussion of ethics back then. What was interesting is a number of issues were brought up. The ethics panel at that time made recommendations. There was some very, the past Supreme Court Chief Justice was there, and several other individuals. What was interesting when this was sent to me, and I looked at it, the very last paragraph, I said, why did the ethics ordinance get so gutted? And people say, well, you know, the city, I've been saying the city attorney directed staff to gut everything just to protect city commissioners. And what's amazing, the very last sentence says that the city staff, was recommending to the city commission to gut the program, and they said, and finally the staff recommended against any penalties for elected officials violating any of the new ethics rules because there is no history to indicate that elected officials would fail to comply. Now, I mean, that would be funny if it wasn't so true. So this is just a documentation why we're left with what we have now, and the faster we can get with getting rid of this and beefing up the process, I think is very important. One other thing, we came to the ethics meeting when you folks talked to the city commissioners, when Scott Maddox wanted to throw in criminal intent instead of intent. We should all know what that means. That's, I want to protect my backside. When you try to, and I've talked with enough attorneys, sometimes I act like I'm one, which, you know, sleeping a Holiday Inn too. But a criminal intent, it's almost impossible to prove. Okay, if a guy goes and robs a bank, did he just rob the bank? Did he have an intent to rob the bank? Or did he have a criminal intent? I don't know how you would ever find someone guilty of a criminal intent. So I would hope this commission, in their discussions tonight, would simply say, thank you for your comments, City Commission, but criminal intent, and I know the chairman and his a very pleasant, professional, quiet demeanor, which sometimes works. But I think I would pound on the table. That's why you're up there and I'm out here, probably. But to say, no, we're not going to accept criminal intent. It's just the intent. If we can prove that you intended to steal money, then that's good enough. Second thing, anonymous complaints. we just talked about this person and how they were so protective. They didn't want to say who they worked for, where they worked for. They certainly weren't going to come in and talk to anyone face to face. We have to have anonymous complaints. Anyone who says no, then here again, they want to weaken the ordinance. So I think this commission has to say, this committee has to tell the commission, no. What are they going to do, fire you? You know, you guys have other jobs. Don't worry about it. The third thing, I think, and I don't know legally how you do it, this group needs subpoena power. You need to have the subpoena power like they have at the state level, because until you do, as a person who on occasion will file an ethics complaint, I can't come here because you won't find the truth. I just got to go next door. 3 points. Let's go to the mayor made some comments. His recommendations, I looked at those, read them over. I assume it means, and this is a question, when they say 5,000 or more per year with the city, is that during a 3-year period, or is that 5,000 per year for 3 years? Does anyone know what that wording means? But we ought to have some clarification. I hope it means $5,000 cumulative during an entire 3-year period. And not that you have to make $5,000 a year for 3 years. So if someone to clarify that, because I'm lost. What do you do in number 2? He talked about the official. If you have an official or a ceremonial position in a person's campaign. Okay, I could see some of the folks we've dealt with that raise $50,000, $75,000 for a city candidate that will say, I don't have an official position. I don't have a ceremonial position. Well, what do? I raise money. Okay? Like Sean Pittman. I want to just throw out a name. I don't know how you resolve that, but obviously somehow we have to deal with individuals whose jobs are to raise money for candidates, and then in return, those candidates give those individuals contracts with the city. So just something to, when you've dealt with them as long as I have, you got to watch out. Number 5, as far as the dollar amount, if you've got a woman here in town who for 20 years has been a lobbyist, not registered, $1,000 fine when you get paid $25,000, $50,000 to get one little bill through the city commission, that's peanuts. And then we're going to have to find her 3 consecutive times. I think that's very, very weak. It needs to be strengthened. The last thing here, when they're talking about city employees, it's anonymous reporting of bullying by city officials. I don't know if there's a clause somewhere that also deals with sexual harassment, but I think it needs to be included. If you have bullying in that same area, you want to have sexual harassment. If, in fact, activities we read about and see on TV is, and we've got some experience here with our own city commission, I think that needs to be added. The letter to Fernandez, switching back, that's all with the mayor's comments. Switching back with Fernandez, it was a great letter. It's done a lot of good. I think the message is getting across to the city commission. We were talking here and we had our auditors say, well, we're going to make sure that if there's stealing going on with the P card, we're going to pass that up to top administration. Well, when the top administration is taking free tickets and having city employees rebuild his house, I don't know if he's going to be concerned about someone taking some free P card expenses. That shows the problem we're having to deal with. It also, the negative side, you wrote the letter, but we need to have the authority to do something. I recognize limited your authority, but we really need to have more authority. We need to have more penalties. The auditor, I think, does a pretty good job. I very seldom would say something negative about him. But let me just suggest, when I read that about 7 years ago, I requested these P card statements, and I looked through them. So this is just the same problem 7 years later. And when I found that the mayor's wife was using his P card at the governor's club, and he's out of town, I came and talked about it at this very podium, and he wasn't very happy with me. And then it's like everyone kind of forgot, and she got confused with her card and their cards and this and that and that. Why she even had the credit card was an important question. The city attorney at that time, I'm sorry, the city manager at that time, gathered up a lot of restricted the use. There was just everyone had a credit card, so they restricted that. But the only thing that would be negative, or let me make a positive suggestion, we should be reviewing credit cards on an annual basis. But right now we've done it twice in 18 years. I've been told by city employees they use those credit cards to go Christmas shopping. And this was information I shared 5 years ago. There's nothing new. And somehow they'll use it, and then they'll pay the money back, and it's completely out of control. So I'm glad someone's looking at it. That's the good news. It's certainly not new. I think that's everything I've got, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. We'll be coming back to several of those items as we move through our agenda and talking more about some specifics. In particular, I do not miss the irony in your 2013 handout here. Next on the agenda is the letter to City Manager Fernandez. I want to point out,
Is there another card there?
I don't have anything else on agenda item 5. Steve Stewart, I have you on 11 if you want to go now. Or, I'm sorry, I have you on 8. I thought everybody spoke at the same time for the agenda item. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, then I'm at fault. Mr. Stewart, you're recognized. I apologize. Yeah, that's fine. I would have just called you when we got to 8, but we can do it now.
Okay, yeah.
That's fine too.
Thanks. Steve Stewart, 3048 Waterford. I appreciate your time as volunteers on this committee. I wanted to just make a couple of comments on I don't quite understand the Ethics Code updates from the mayor. Is this something that was put together and submitted to the Ethics Commission from the mayor's office?
No, sir. I was going to do, what I'll do is just jump to this so people know where it came from. When the City Commission had its workshop on ethics, they asked me to go over what the board had asked for. And at that meeting, the mayor handed out this list, which none of us had seen. He suggested that we ought to put this on our agenda, and I think I was fairly straightforward in saying that I would certainly take any requests from the City Commission to put stuff on our agenda, but that we would agenda what we wanted to agenda. So we will be going through all of those. To what extent we follow up on any of them, I don't know.
This wasn't voted on at the workshop?
No, sir, it absolutely was not.
Okay. All right. And so what I want to do is go through these real quick. I mean, these are great recommendations. They're obviously not written by an attorney, which means they'll have to be addressed. But I wanted to run through these and talk about the number of issues that these things do address, which they're very strong. And I would recommend that we somehow get these back and applaud the mayor for making these recommendations and use that to try to get them in an ethics code. Because, again, they are very strong if you look at them. The first one is something that's been done in Miami. They've limited all campaign contributions from city vendors. It's been controversial, however, it has been implemented in Miami, and I think it's, given our situation, something that should be considered here. Again, it is on the cutting edge, and I applaud that. The second thing here is we recently did an article about campaign consultants. Every city commissioner, every campaign consultant that there was for a city commissioner has a contract with the city. Okay, so this issue here, I think, is another one that needs to be addressed. Again, I think the language is a little bit inartful in terms of it wasn't written by an attorney, but again, addresses an issue that we have with the city. The third one on the ban from lobbying, again, a great issue. I think I would add the word directly or indirectly, because we've seen some issues with a company that has got a lobbyist maybe from that's not directly related, but it still is representing that company. So I think that is another good one that we need to look at. Number 4, This is the issue of doing business with vendors. And again, it's not worded the way I would word it, but I think that one of the things that we wrote an article about this in the state statutes. There's a lot of room for ambiguity in terms of arguing for competitive bids, but this is very clear in that if someone is if there's a vendor with the city and you're going to do business with them that is over, say, a $2,500 or $5,000 threshold, it's not allowed, period, regardless if it's competitive, fair market, or whatever. And it puts a line in the sand, and it makes everyone know what the rules are. And obviously would have stopped, if we look at what happened with the Edison and the catering event, we're not talking about just mayor, city commissioners, we're talking about public officials. Those are people that file financial disclosure. This would have never happened. So I think, again, number 4 is something we've got to get in our ethics code. Number 5, the level of penalties, I think is something you might look at, but I have firsthand knowledge of this. If you look at these emails that the city has put on their website, there are a number of people that are in these emails with vendors that have business before the city that are not registered lobbyists. And it's just blown off as something that's not going to be enforced. What is even more disheartening, though, when you look at this, is that there are city staff that are on these same emails, and they should know that these people aren't registered. And so, again, number 5 is one that we've got to have. Number 6, I watched the workshop, and Chairman Herring, I appreciate your efforts there. I do think I will echo some previous comments that we do need to be more forceful. You do not, and again, I understand the collegiality, but we have a problem here. And I think that, and I know that was probably the first workshop we had, but I will tell you that as I watched when Commissioner Ziffer got rid of anonymous complaints, it really just made me think that, we really don't know, they don't understand what they're doing there. Because I will tell you that there's a reason why people in this community want to be anonymous. I think people know that I do a newspaper here. Elected officials have called my advertisers, okay? Now, I fight, I don't back off and cower, but there's a reason why this community is at the stage that it's at. And if they do that to me, imagine what they're doing around the workforce here in the city. So I think this is something that's got to be explained to city commissioners. It's not really debatable. We have to have a way for people to anonymously register complaints or bring up issues. The last point I want to make, and then I will head out. One of the things that concerns me is the pace that we're moving on some of these issues. As I've gotten older, I've become more patient, but I still am impatient about this. We've got an issue, obviously, that is on the forefront with these football tickets and this catering thing, which is in the process and being handled. But I think that people are missing the sense of urgency for people who work here. We're talking about the average worker in the city of Tallahassee. Now, it is known, first of all, on the football tickets, that was a story that first broke in August, that people started to know about what's going on, and so we are here now with that with the city manager. But something that I don't quite understand is that also in that story is there are people that work here, high-level management, that were in those football boxes and took tickets from Mr. Fernandez, okay? They are in charge of a lot of people. I don't understand, with a budget of $400,000, why somebody here can't go and ask questions and let's, find out if it's true, and if it is, those people need to be suspended so they're not making decisions that affect people's lives. These names are in reports. There's Ellen Blair and Mike Tadros. Now, you can say, well, they took a football ticket, they didn't know who it came from. Well, if they're sitting in a stadium of 80,000 people in a seat, you're right. They were in a box. They know where the football tickets come from. Those people don't need to be making decisions if they took those tickets. And it's a simple question. I can't get elected officials to ask that question. Just ask them. If they did it, that they need to be suspended, because they are, when you're a head of HR, where do you go to complain? HR. Okay? And so I don't understand why we have to wait and wait and wait. All right, we're paying tax dollar money to people here who have degrees and know how this works. Ask them. And again, I'm impatient about this, and because I think it's affecting people. And it just seems like we just want to get in a process and nobody wants to stand up and make a decision. This is what we need you for. So I appreciate your time, and I hope you understand the level of anxiety I have on this issue, because I think it's affecting people now every day. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stewart. Anyone else? Mr. Wilcox.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I did put in an appearance form in the box over there, but I don't know if it made it to you. But wanted to start, you know, it's about to be Thanksgiving, so I wanted to give you some thanks. I think the board has really done some great work recently. Board Member Phillips, I want to thank you for your service since you're going to be leaving the board. Really have been a very thoughtful and good perspective that you brought to the discussions here. And I wanted to thank Board Member McNeil and Board Member Grant for supporting the chair hearing at the City Commission workshop there. I thought that was a good show of support. I wanted to thank you for your draft letter to the city manager. I thought you hit, it was very well written and you hit all the correct points. And I think it's a very effective you know, response, I guess, to an ethics complaint. You know, even if the city commission does not give you, you know, expanded authority to investigate complaints, that, you know, being able to send an advisory letter, as you couched it, is very effective. And you know, just that element of public shaming, I guess, you know, I think can be a very good tool for creating an ethical environment within city government. So thank you for that. I'm a little concerned about the, I'm anxious to hear from Julie what the status of the proposed ordinance is. We do have concerns about prohibiting anonymous complaints. I actually believe that's, you know, that would be the city attempting to interfere with your authority. You have already adopted a bylaw that says you will accept anonymous complaints, and so we would be very concerned if that proposal moves forward. We also are concerned about the burden of providing or proving corrupt intent, and would urge you to, you know, be strong in your opposition to that. And then I guess finally, we were surprised by the mayor's recommendation and did find some value in some of those proposals. So we'll just you know, wait and hear your discussion on that later.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Anyone else? We're going to have comments, by the way, on a number of these things as we get to the board discussion on these, particularly the issue of corruptly, the issue of anonymous, and then the mayor's recommendations. So, anyone else? Let's go to the draft letter to City Manager Fernandez. This board voted at our last meeting to do a letter, and I told you that we would have a draft for your review and edit at this meeting. The idea would be that a letter would go to the city manager and then separate cover letters to the mayor and each of the city commissioners with the letter to the city manager attached to them, so that we would be communicating formally with each one of them also. What I'd like to do, I don't think the cover letter probably, I'm hoping people won't have too many concerns, but what I'd like to do is start on the letter to the city manager. If anyone has anything they want to add, delete, change, there is no pride of authorship. Julie and I kind of drafted letters independent of each other and then tried to weave them together, so it's probably a little longer than either one of us would have done, but we each had and Jerry did yeoman's work editing two documents that didn't fit very well, but we each kind of dug our heels in on the sentences that we really liked. So again, it's probably a little bit longer than it might have been with a single author, but that's what you get when you have a committee, I suppose. So I would recognize Mr. Grant.
I was just going to say, you're right. When you have too many authors, it's like the old adage of saying that people got together to design a racehorse and they came up with a camel. But I would just make a comment. I think the letter is pretty good. And yeah, certainly if I had written it, it would be a lot shorter. And but I think you hit the right point. So I commend you for a good letter. I think this is a good start on this type of process where we act as an ethics board and a conscience for those elected officials and appointed officials who work for the city of Tallahassee. So I think it's a very, very good effort. And I wouldn't want to start picking it apart because, you know, there's many desires in the hierarchy of needs for people, you know, food, shelter, money, and the need to edit is probably at the very top. So having said that, I will not begin to edit it, although, again, as a non-attorney, I would definitely have written it differently. But I thank you very much because I think it was great, you and Julie and Jerry, whoever did it. But, you know, more importantly, it's a statement from this board that I think is important. So that's really what I'm left with. It's a good letter. Thanks.
Ms. Phillips.
When you put 3 attorneys together and draft a letter, that's where the problem is. But seriously, I think it is a good letter. If I had written it, it would be much shorter. I do have just a couple of simple recommendations, which are actually clarifications and commas and semicolons, so it doesn't change the tenor of the letter, but it does just make it a little read easier. So that's all I would have.
Well, I think we've generally adopted a policy in the past that as you have those types of edits, we would just adopt them and not
Right.
necessarily do board approval so that none of us get get our knuckles wrapped with a ruler.
Lucy will take care of incorporating those.
Yes.
Okay.
Any comments on this end of the table?
Appreciate the letter very much.
Okay, Mr. Davis, so you guys are okay with it as written and with Sonny's technical grammatical polishing?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. We had a motion and a vote last week to do that.
Mr. Chair, can I go back just to make
Mr. Grant,
make
Dr.
clear,
Grant.
Are we, with those changes, then we are all essentially agreed that this letter, could you just tell me then how is it transmitted? What's the next step?
What we will do when this meeting ends, Ms. Meadows, Keefe, and I have already arranged, we're going back, and with Lucy's help, we're going back in the office, and we're going to finalize it, sign it, and get it out tonight.
Great. So it'll go to the mayor, all the city commissioners, and the individual involved, or?
And yes, simultaneously, there will be
Thank you.
a series of them sent.
Thank you.
Just so that we are clear, does somebody want to move the letter with the edits and the transmittal letter?
I'll move.
Dr. Grant
I
moves.
would move that the board adopt the letter with the minor technical changes from Ms. Phillips.
And Ms. Phillips seconds. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. That is done, with the exception of getting it printed and signed. We had a discussion last month about whistleblower complaints, and I asked that we put this on the agenda. There is a state statute on whistleblowers, but whistleblowing isn't protected broadly. For instance, if I'm a private citizen and I go to another private citizen and talk about something that's going on in the city of Tallahassee, that's not whistleblowing. So we asked Mr. Currington in way too little time to look at the issue so that he could give us just sort of the lay of the land. I don't think there's anything here for us to do other than I do want people on the board to understand what the current statutory whistleblower protections are and how they might apply to this board. So, Mr. Currington, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. Thank you. As we've heard again today, I think there's concern among the public that citizens or employees of the city are fearful of coming forward and filing complaints for fear of retaliation. Whistleblower Act is designed to protect employees from being retaliated against by their supervisors or public officials. It does not protect the public. So first and foremost, understand that a Whistleblower Act protects employees of the city, or in this case, contractors with the city. But it does not protect some of the people in the audience who might file complaints. Okay? Okay, so that said, the question is, and I think it's worth repeating the question, is whether an employee filing a complaint alleging a violation of the city's ethics code, and again, I want to distinguish that from the state's ethics code, okay? This answers the question about whether city employees and subcontractors of the city employees are protected if they file a complaint alleging a violations of the city's ethics code, and they file it with the board. As the chair just mentioned, Whistleblower Act protects it provided you file the complaint with the appropriate agency. So you just can't go to the public square at Hyde Park and announce it from a soapbox. You have to report it to the appropriate agency. That is a condition, number one. Number two, the Whistleblower Act doesn't cover every act. It has to be one of two things. The complaint has to allege a violation of law that, quote, creates and presents substantial and specific danger to the public's health, safety, or welfare, which I think we agreed amongst ourselves was a pretty high standard. It has to be a specific and substantial danger to public health, or the allegation has to allege an act or suspected act of gross mismanagement, malfeasance, misfeasance, gross waste of public funds, suspected or actual Medicaid fraud or abuse, or gross neglect of duty. This memo essentially says that I believe an allegation of an ethical violation would constitute either misfeasance or abuse or neglect of a duty, and therefore an ethics violation allegation would be protected by this Whistleblower Act, provided it is reported to the right agency. Now, importantly, the Whistleblower Act requires a written signed complaint. That's a little problematic because to the extent we accept anonymous complaints, if somehow an anonymous complainant was outed, they may not be protected by the Whistleblower Act. So it has to be a signed written complaint. Now, there's an inference in there. A signed complaint, I think we sort of assume that you can read the signature and identify the complainant, and therefore it would not be anonymous. Now, my thinking is that even though it's not legible, the point is it's meant to identify the person, and I assume at some point through expert witnesses, a handwriting expert, you could identify the complainant, and therefore even an illegible signature would be sufficient under the law. But I think the protection is for people who are willing to go and publicly state their concerns. And therefore, I cannot sit here today and say an anonymous complainant would be protected. Okay? That doesn't mean we have to eliminate anonymous complaints. They just may not receive the benefit of the whistleblower statute. And again, just for emphasis, I do not address whether or not this would protect a citizen, someone in the audience that files a complaint under the state ethics code. I have to ask the state ethics office whether that would be protected under the whistleblower statute. And again, I just want to reemphasize, private citizens are not protected by whistle. It's meant to intervene into the employer-employee relationship and protect employees.
But this would offer then an option for someone who wants to file an ethics complaint for a violation of the city's ethics ordinance with this board to file it as a whistleblower, potentially, and provide some protections for them for in a non-anonymous situation. So even though they might be filing a sworn complaint, there are some protections potentially for them depending upon the nature of the relationships.
That is correct, and I'm glad you triggered a thought that I overlooked. It's not an absolute protection. It's not an absolute grant of immunity because A whistleblower is not protected when the whistleblower disclosed information that the whistleblower knew to be false. Okay? And by the same token, I think whistleblowers need to be aware there's still the law of torts out there. I mean, you can libel and slander someone. So if someone goes to Hyde Park and stands on a soapbox and announces it to the world, there may or may not be tortious behavior there. And I just think it's not a carte blanche green light to do and say anything you want.
Okay. And we will come back again on the next item and talk pretty specifically about this whole concept of anonymous complaints and sworn complaints. What I'd like to do at this point is take about a 10-minute break. It's 5:12. How about if we come back at 5:25?
So she can maybe type the letter.
Or maybe actually, Julie says 5:30, so we can get the letter retyped and actually get it done maybe during the meeting. That'll give us a chance to get Ms. Phillips' edits in, get signature blocks done, headers and all that stuff. So how about if we come back in that, whatever that is, 17 minutes? And we're taking a break for the folks in the back. We good? All right. We're back only 8 minutes later than I said, which for us is pretty good. Where are we? We're on item 8, the City Commission workshop and the mayor's ethics recommendations. We're going to do those two things separately. In terms of the workshop, 2 of you were there. Thank you very much. I wasn't sure if we were allowed to talk to each other in noticed meetings and such, and I've since learned we probably could have. But I want to tell you here that I did tell the commission that while we're supposed to be independent, we are completely dependent on them in 3 areas. One is budget, because they set our budget. Second is the sanctions that we can impose, which they set by ordinance. And the third is our jurisdiction, which they set by ordinance. And that's what we were there to cover. Talked about 3 issues that they picked up from our recommendations. So not all of our recommendations, but first was misuse of position. And you heard already that there was, we wanted misuse of position, intentional misuse of position. And they moved to change intentional to corrupt, or intentionally to corruptly. And I got asked about that, and I did not give a very good answer, but I did follow up a couple days later with a, what is this, 3-page letter to the city attorney, and pointed out this, and I think it's important to go on the record. Civil misuse of position law is in the ethics code, and that's 112.313. There's also a criminal misuse of public office in chapter 838. And obviously, the standards for proving criminal misuse should be more strict than the standards for proving civil or an ethics violation misuse. In 2006, they both, up until 2016, used the word corruptly. But in 2016, the legislature changed the standard in the criminal statute and deleted the word corruptly and inserted the term knowingly and intentionally, which is very similar to the language we had proposed. That change in the criminal statute came about, it had been discussed for over a period of several years. It was a result of a 2010 statewide grand jury that was impaneled by the governor to examine criminal activity of public officials who abused their office and to look at whether prosecutors had sufficient resources. And what the statewide grand jury recommended in the criminal misuse of public position was that by removing the additional element of corruptly from the offenses of bribery, unlawful compensation, and official misconduct and bid tampering, that the scienter of acting knowingly and dishonestly for a wrongful purpose, by having corrupt in there, you had to show that the person acted knowingly and dishonestly for a wrongful purpose. That limited the effectiveness of Florida's criminal anti-corruption laws by placing an extra burden beyond the requirement of criminal intent that is standard in criminal offenses. And what they said was that by requiring corrupt intent, the prosecution has to provide testimony from one of the actors involved, that in order to prove that the persons involved acted with wrongful purpose. And the grand jury suggested that the standard criminal burden of intentionally or knowingly be used in place of corrupt intent. So again, I think that our recommendation for intentional was well-founded. I apologize to the board that I did not make as stringent an argument on that as I wish I had at the time. I was expecting just to do a brief presentation and sit down. I didn't necessarily know I was going to be involved in an ongoing series of questions and debate. So that the first issue, and we expect these 3 issues, and I'll let Ms. Meadows-Keefe speak to the time. We do think that the Commission is going to expand our jurisdiction. So misuse of position, one of the things we ask for, acceptance of gifts that might influence official behavior, and then the third, which is really minor, is local filing and local accessibility of the Form 1 financial disclosures for elected city officials, so that would be readily available to everyone. And if the House bill goes through this year, that would be filing of the Form 6 financial disclosure, which for those of you who file a Form 1, if you've ever looked at Form 6, it is far more detailed. So those three things. Now, the one other change that got made was this whole issue of whether or not complaints have to be sworn. And I'm going to let Ms. Meadows-Keefe talk about, but what I want to tell you is that I have been a proponent of anonymous complaints since the board started, and we are not giving up anonymous complaints. So just to be crystal clear, and Ms. Meadows-Keefe is going to walk us through how that's going to work.
Thank you for this opportunity, and I just, having been here since the beginning, the board at its inception had ongoing dialogue about whether complaints needed to be sworn or not. We reviewed jurisdictions. First, we started with the State Ethics Commission, which we know does require sworn complaints. We looked around at other jurisdictions in Florida that have similar boards. Likewise, I think we didn't find any that just allowed an ethics complaint to proceed anonymously. However, given the citizen intention behind the charter amendment, given the desire to be open and transparent and to give people many opportunities to get issues heard, the board made a decision that it would accept anonymous complaints. And the method prior to the board continues today of how many of those complaints come, and that is through the Ethics and Fraud Hotline. And that hotline existed way before there was a board, even before there was an ethics advisory panel. The auditor set up an ethics and fraud hotline, or a fraud hotline, and it was staffed by the auditor. Once I came, even before the referendum passed, my office took over control of that hotline. So I took the calls, I logged the calls, and tracked everything. So the thing that's come up is the way that complaints come to us and ultimately get investigated. It becomes more difficult without a name, right, to call and to follow up to potentially get more information. So the commission decided or thought through this issue, and the board did participate in some of this discussion with them about the role of anonymous complaints. The bottom line is this, that anonymous complaints are still going to be taken. Anonymous complaints are encouraged. In fact, I will be talking hopefully next month about efforts that will be made to further publicize the hotline and the phone number so that more people actually call it. And also send emails in any other way that complaints come in. The thing that's changing is that for an anonymous complaint to proceed through our process of adjudication and ultimately penalty, there will need to be a sworn complaint. So how will that work with anonymous complaints? It's fairly simple. If you've been here, you know that our council opined, maybe it was a year ago, maybe a little more, that this board has the authority to self-initiate complaints. So the thing that would change is that if an anonymous complaint's received and the board determines that this is something that they feel they want to pursue, the complainant in the case simply becomes the board. So the board will step into the shoes of that anonymous complainant. So I'm afraid that in all of the discussions that have gone on, somehow that's been lost. And there's been a perception on the part of the community that those are disappearing, and in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. And arguably, those complaints will be more meritorious having the board as the complainant. And there was a my view written by Mr. Poitevin that appeared in the Democrat. And Mr. Poitevin called me today just to talk through some things, and he and I had this same discussion. And he now actually understands this and believes that this is probably a good process. So I wanted to use this opportunity to publicly say that we are not gutting anonymous complaints. We want them. We are going to try to validate them, and then the board will say, hey, yes, this is something we're concerned about, so we will take on the role of complainant. So I just think that's following best practices among other local ethics groups, among the Ethics Commission, and at one point there was even a discussion with the state attorney about due process and fairness. So now if someone's got a complaint, they know who's complaining about them, and that would be the board members here.
Okay, so anybody have any questions? Where I think we'll be inevitably is the first time we get an anonymous complaint that the board wants to pursue so that we self-initiate. We obviously will have some bylaw changes and some process to go through, but it's difficult to predict those things ahead of time, as we've learned with the letter that we approved tonight, that we didn't go through any process that I think we would have foreseen a year and a half ago. But before we would issue any sanctions, there would be a sworn complaint. Before we would find make a hard decision on a violation, there would be a sworn complaint. But that does not mean that we would not take anonymous complaints to begin the process of deciding whether or not the board wants to pursue an issue. Dr. Grant.
Yes, sir. Just a question. So I guess my understanding is that we have not ever, as a board, initiated a complaint. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, but what you're saying is based on anonymous calls, we find something that appears to be valid or appears to have some substance to it, then we certainly could or should do that, depending on the wishes of the board, obviously.
Mr. Chair.
And it might not even be an anonymous call. You could read something in the newspaper that was upsetting, bring it before this board, and the board agrees that yes, that's something we should pursue that we believe is within our jurisdiction. Or any of us might learn. I've had a couple times when I was sitting in a fast food joint and somebody'd walk up and say, hey, you're on that ethics thing, aren't you? And I'd go, yes, I am. And they would proceed to kind of download their thoughts. So far, none of those has been anything that I thought was in the nature and form of a complaint, but we've sort of always thought that information might come into us in other forms than formal complaints, and we still should have the ability to pursue it.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because based on my initial orientation was that if someone should download to me, I would say, stop, how about send that to Julie, otherwise you put me in an awkward position of having that information. If you have something valid, I'll be happy to consider it as the board meets, but if you give it to me, then that's not the proper channel, correct?
Right.
I'm not saying that right, but bottom line is it's got to go to you first, otherwise I'd have to recuse myself or something like that?
It would be always better for the person to put it in through the normal channel,
Right.
but let's say that you learned about something, you overheard a conversation in the hallway. That doesn't mean that you are prohibited from, now you might be, depending on the nature of the issue and the information, any of us might end up recusing ourselves, which is why we've been kind of hot on getting a seventh member, because we could get pretty thin pretty quick. But yes, we don't want to cut off any path for getting serious ethical issues before the board. Ms. Meadowskeef.
Now I've lost that train of thought that I had before that was so profound. The meetings, there was a question about the meeting dates. The ordinance will be introduced on December the 6th. So that's the first reading. And then they're only meeting one time in January. And so the second reading and ultimate hopeful passage is January the 31st. Oh, and the thing that I was going to say that had slipped my mind was that we have had executive session on anonymous complaints to ask if the board wanted to pursue them. So there's been a history documented of the board receiving an anonymous complaint and having executive session to see if it wanted to pursue a complaint.
Right. In my mind, no matter how the complaint comes to us, whether it's sworn or anonymous, the fact that the board has to make that affirmative decision that we think that there is likely an ethics violation and we think that it is worth investigating and potentially, I'll use the word prosecuting in a very loose sense, that to me is far more important than how the information got in front of us in the first place. Mr. Currington.
If I could elaborate on what I believe I understand Member Grant's concern is, the word we're looking for, I guess, is ex parte communications. Because this is a collegial body, we do want to go through the process and have complaints filed with Julie, who's not a voting member, to avoid an allegation of an ex parte communication, which we have a bylaw on.
That's good.
Okay. That's right.
Once again, keeping us out of jail, much appreciated. So that's kind of the ethics workshop. You understand where we are now. We are hopeful that in January we will see a substantial and positive change to the board's jurisdiction. This obviously, the recommendations that we submitted obviously are not the only recommendations we'll ever submit to the City Commission. We'll go through the exercise again when it's appropriate and when we have material and great ideas and great proposals to submit to them. The other thing on this item of business is the mayor's 6 recommendations. And I'd like to walk through all 6 of them, but then what I would like to propose, all of them would, as has been pointed out, would require some wordsmithing, but what I'd like to propose is that any board member, including myself, who has one or more of these, that they really would like to shepherd, that we individually just get with Julie and say, hey, I think number 7, I'm going to pick 7 because it's not on the list, number 7 is a great idea, and here's kind of my thoughts on it, and then Julie can do some wordsmithing, and we'll bring back those items rather than try in a drafted more as ordinances and less as concepts at a future meeting. And then that particular board member can present the issue that they are fond of. And if she gets multiple requests, then she'll just have to deal with that, so we're not meeting outside the sunshine. But some of these, in my mind, are easier. Some of them are more difficult. You all know that I have not particularly wanted for us to become an elections board and stay an ethics board. And some of this does wander pretty close to elections material. But Ms. Meadows-Keefe, would you like to just walk us quickly through each of the 6, and we will stop it after each one and see if anyone has any comments or questions?
I didn't know I'd be walking us through, but I'm happy to do that. A surprise. It's great. So the mayor did provide some updates at the workshop and asked for the board to consider those, which we're doing today. So I'm happy to work with each board member. If there's one board member that wants to, again, work through one of these with me, I'm happy to do that so we can give these the attention and consideration they deserve. First, is a proposal that all individuals who serve or seek to serve as mayor or on the city commission are banned from accepting any funds from any person or entity that is or has done business of $5,000 or more per year with the city in the last 3 years.
Okay, and to answer Dr. Jackson's question, the way I read this, and I don't know if that's the way it's intended, the way I read this would be if anybody did $5,000 of business with the city 3 years ago, this would cover them. If they did $5,000 2 years ago, it would cover them. It would not cover someone who did $4,500 3 years ago, $4,500 2 years ago, and $4,500 last year. So cumulatively, you'd be just under $15,000, but you'd never broken $5,000 in any one year. There are multiple ways of reading it. That's just the way I first read it, and I'm sticking to it. That doesn't mean that's what we, if anybody wants to pursue this, that's necessarily the language we'd put in front of the board. Questions? Okay, number 2.
Number 2 is that all individuals or entities that have done business of $5,000 or more per year with the city in the last 3 years cannot have any official or ceremonial involvement in a candidate's campaign for mayor or the city commission.
Okay, questions? Dr. Grant?
Yeah, I think that the issue that was brought up was if someone is a fundraiser for a candidate, isn't that an official position? I mean, does that catch all that, or I guess I'd turn to the attorney to ask him.
It's my thought that that's why we would want, if any board member wants to pursue any of these, that's why we would want to come back with it drafted as an ordinance to answer exactly that kind of question.
Right. I'll take that one.
So
You'll take
for instance, if I have a big house and I allow somebody who's running for office to use my house, I kind of host a party for them or a fundraising event. One time, I do it the one time early on after they've qualified. Am I one of these people? I don't know. Or should I be one of these people? Again, I don't know.
It's a tough one.
Mr. Currington, you have a befuddled look on your face.
Well, no, and I guess it goes to the first question, too. I think Mr. Jackson's concern, I would suggest...
Dr. Jackson.
Dr. Jackson, I apologize. In the last 5 years or per year, I would think that's a bit ambiguous. I think it's easily correctable. You could say in at least one of the last 3 years or in each of the last 3 years to clarify what Dr. Jackson's concern is, I think. But that's easily fixable.
Okay. Other comments, questions on number 2? Number 3, Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
Okay, I got a note that Mr. Grant was interested in helping with number 2. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, sure.
Did anyone adopt number 1 to Shepherd, or, okay, that's an orphan at this point. Okay.
We don't have to do it in this meeting. People are free to talk to you all month long.
Correct.
Since you have hardly anything to do with the holidays coming up.
No, absolutely not. Number 3. Oh, the other thing is that we did have our attorney chime in just now, but the city attorney, I think before it would go before the commission, would do a legal review and probably do some legal recommendations on this. So I think we're mainly just dealing with substance. Number 3, all former mayors and city commissioners are banned from lobbying before the Tallahassee City Commission for 3 years after leaving office. And I believe the current ban is 2 years.
Ms. Phillips.
Okay. It wouldn't be before the Tallahassee, it would be lobbying the Tallahassee City Commission.
And it seems to me it might also be boards, councils, any decision-making body of the city, because the city commission is not necessarily the ultimate decision-maker on every issue.
Right.
Aren't there some things that get decided elsewhere that don't get approved by the commission?
Code enforcement, I mean, most of them, yeah. I mean, there's probably some things that do. Is Ms.
Ms. Phillips?
I mean, I would take it, but I've got one more meeting.
You've got a month?
And we know how much you can get done in a month.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Sure, what the heck.
Thank you.
And I had thought, one thing, you might tie the number of years to whatever the statute is for legislators, because I know they've been talking about bumping that up to a substantially longer period.
6 years.
So there might be a, just a
Oh, that's
cross-reference.
right. That's right.
That might be something else to think about. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, number 4.
All individuals who serve as mayor or on the city commission should have no official business ties with individuals or entities that are doing business of $5,000 or more per year with the city, to include the investors of those businesses or projects.
To include the investors.
Questions? Thoughts? Okay.
Thank you.
That one, investors can be tricky because you can have an investor and you would know better than I certainly, but you can have somebody who's invested in a company that's invested in a company that's invested in a company that does something. Yeah, and so, okay, we've got you down as the tricky board member. Number 5, Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
All lobbyists and organizations that advocate before this body without registering with the city's official lobbyist registry can be fined up to $1,000 for a first-time violation, $2,500 for a second violation, and banned from lobbying before the city for 3 years for a third violation.
Questions? Ms. Davis?
I'll take that one.
And could I ask you if, as you do it, you'd look at the definition of lobbyist and the definition of lobbying in the current ordinance, kind of as an ancillary piece, just to make sure that you're comfortable that we would know with some degree of certainty what those definitions mean? And number 6, Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
Okay. Finally, the Ethics Commission shall produce a process by which city employees can anonymously report a bullying claim against an elected official.
Shall adopt.
I'll take that one.
Thank you very much.
And again, I would ask that you, not just bullying, but you think about harassment, not sexual, but harassment generally, because there's a lot of things that might not be bullying that still create a pretty hostile work environment.
About how many city employees do we think we have? I mean,
Total city employees are approximately 3,000.
okay. All right, we use an online anonymous reporting module at FAMU for hazing and bullying, so.
Just use my hotline for that.
Yeah, you got the model right
I've
there.
got the hotline, so we'll talk about it, though. I thank you so much for adopting that one.
And did we have one that's an orphan? Was it number 1?
Yeah.
Number 1 is still an orphan.
I'll take number 1.
Thank you. How
So-
convenient, there's 6 of you, and there were 6 proposals.
So this does not mean that any of you is required to come back with a recommendation. If you look at it and decide there are issues, Mr. Currington can help with if there are constitutional issues in any of them involving free speech or whatever. But it means that we will look at each one of these and consider it, and come back if it is the will of that particular member. I guess we're kind of in committees of one again, with some actual ordinance language with carefully defined, carefully crafted, carefully lawyered up language. Okay. That would conclude item 8.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Dr. Grant.
Maybe I'm the only one that's confused, but the other thing that came up at the workshop was the business about the corrupt, misuse with the word corrupt in it, rather than, which isn't really what we were looking for, but that's what we ended up with.
That's where I was saying I wrote the letter a couple days later to the city attorney, pointing out the difference between the ethics law and the criminal law on misuse of public official position, and how the legislature had gotten rid of the word corruptly. I think we have a good argument there. So since he's the one that basically puts pen to paper, I am hoping he will give some consideration to that.
All right, you may help me. We certainly could, as a board, make a statement on that, if that's the desire of the board, to say to those in the city who are writing that's not the preference of the ethics board. Is that something that we'd be willing to consider?
Comments?
Did he respond to your email?
No, I hand-delivered a letter to him. No, I haven't gotten a response. If you want to put that in the form of a motion, we'll debate it.
I think Ms. Phillips has a comment.
So, yeah, if you put it in a form of motion, I'll
Yeah,
understand
okay.
it, but I'm not
I was floating the idea before I did the motion.
Oh, okay, so float the idea.
Yeah, floating the idea was, and again, I'm speaking for myself, but based on my understanding of that, the city has established or is in the process of establishing a standard that we think is unreachable in many cases and would make our job harder rather than easier, whether intentionally or not, okay? And so floating the idea of if there's consensus or agreement once we make the motion, that maybe the board would like to make a statement that says, hey, that's not the right kind of language. We would prefer for the proper conduct or efficient conduct, whatever word you want to use in there, of this board, that the standard be this, which is what Mr. Herring, our chair, wrote, I think, in a letter or email. So it's really backing you up, Mr. Chair, with a motion from the board, and we can, you say convey that via email or whatever means you think may be more appropriate. But that's what I'm floating. Is there any discussion before I make a motion?
Well, here's
When?
Ms. Phillips.
No, so I was just thinking, I mean, you've already drafted it, basically, so just send it as an observation.
What I was going to say, one possibility would be to simply put a cover letter saying the board has discussed this issue and asked that it be shared and send it to the mayor and each of the commissioners. Take the existing letter, which is already, at least it gets through Microsoft Word without any highlighting,
It's lawyerly.
and send it on to them, because it makes the point that you would think the criminal law would have the higher standard, and in this case, and it points out the distinction in state law, that our ethics standard is actually, in state law, is actually a higher standard of proof than our criminal standard for essentially the same behavior. But
Right.
I would think that would be the easiest and fastest thing to do without coming back at another meeting.
Yeah, I would agree. Just kind of making the point that we disagree with the language that they're proposing at this point. That's kind of what you said in your email, though, right? Or, I'm asking because I haven't seen the
Yeah,
correspondence.
I apologize that I didn't
And
share it.
it's kind of a follow-up. I mean,
Yeah,
really.
yes.
It's more informative. And maybe, there's a possibility that, that they did not think about that either, and that the city commissioners may, in fact, after they've been provided the additional information, they're educated, that they would agree with you and the board that this might be a better option.
It is a point I wish I had made during their hearing, but it was not on the top of my head to be citing the criminal statutes. Dr. Grant, is that a motion that I heard?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we amend the correspondence to the City Commission to reinforce your position in terms of our respectful disagreement, I guess, with their language as proposed, because, I'll leave it at that. So the motion is that we, as a board, essentially support the chair's correspondence with concurrence from the board, or words to that effect.
Okay, so there'd be a short cover letter on top of the three-page letter.
A short cover letter, yeah, I make a motion that we have a short cover letter on top of that with that sort of language.
You have a second?
Second.
Mr. Davis seconds. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, like sign. And we will be doing a letter, I think we can do this tomorrow. I think we can do the cover letter tomorrow. You're not here tomorrow. We'll be doing a cover letter tonight,
Okay.
which I think will go quickly.
Yes.
And you all trust me to write a 2-sentence cover letter? That's you're trusting the lawyer, so careful.
Mr. Chair, one more question on this, and will
Dr.
this come up in the December 6th meeting? Is that when it is anticipated?
Well, okay, so you're asking, okay, so the ordinance is drafted, and it's in a agenda format, so it's going as with the language that we are disagreeing with.
Right.
That is what will be considered on the December meeting date.
December 6th.
But we will make sure that the commission receives the chair's letter in advance of that meeting. So they'll at least have that to consider prior to voting.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. As we do every month, I will ask the board members if there are any issues that they want to add to next month's agenda. Anything that we haven't talked about. We've got a couple things, obviously, to pursue. Julie is pointing me to deadline for board application.
Just for the public to know that we do have a vacancy coming up on the board, and the deadline for applications for anyone watching is the 27th of this month. So if anyone's interested in occupying the board seat, please have an application in by the 27th.
And that application should go into the city of Tallahassee, since this
There's
is the
direction.
city appointment.
Yep.
And is that on the website?
It is on the website.
On our website?
You have to look for it. But yes, it's accessible.
Or anybody who is sleep impaired and watching this, call Julie.
You may call me, 891-8036.
There we go. Any other public comment? Dr. Jackson, I was worried when you didn't jump up, but public comment. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to put a word in there.
There you go. I've got Irwin Jackson, 1341 Jackson Properties, Tallahassee. 3 or 4 things. Julie had contacted me a few weeks ago, said if I have any good ideas here of problems to share them with her. So I have 3 or 4 to share with you today. One is we had the state attorney looked into some issues surrounding our Mayor Gillum. One of the things he mentioned in there that Mayor Gillum did not transfer the money and do this, do that, but his employees did. So the question is to investigate, to look at most of it, reread the report by the state attorney, and it's very clear that city employees were used to participate in the campaign of the current mayor for governor. And I think that is a no-no for city employees. So I think someone should look at that. Obviously, I'll sign my name to anything you got up on any of these or whatever we need. Second problem, this I think is very important also, residency requirement. Last year, and most everyone knows, we had Scott Maddox, city commissioner, living in the county. I have been out to his house on occasion for fundraisers and other activities. I know where he lives, but I went to court to prove that, and lo and behold, to my surprise, the judge ruled that her interpretation of the residence requirement is it doesn't matter where you live when you run, when you announce. It doesn't matter if you're elected, you can live in a county. You can be certified the winner and live in a county, or Tennessee. I mean, it's just, you can live anywhere in the country you want, but you must live in the city on the first day of your term. Not the second, not the third, just the first. Now, if that's our policy, our residency policy, I've not met anyone other than this judge who feels that's our policy. I think it'd be very important for this commission to set down, there's great examples all around the state where they have procedures to determine your residency. There's certain different retirements, not retirement, there's certain lengths of time you have to live in the city before you can even run to be a city commissioner and that type of thing. So the whole residency requirement, I think there's always, for example, right now, I know we have individuals in the county that are going to be running for mayor, okay? And they're willing to live in a city for one day, and they're going to follow the judge's opinion, the judge's ruling, not opinion. So that's the issue we're going to be dealing with, and I personally don't want to go to court. I think I've proved the point, and you folks could certainly correct that. Third thing, a couple weeks ago I had a little press conference. I had some employees call me. They said that Rick Fernandez had staff from Underground Utilities. The head of Underground Utilities is Mike Tadros. And Mike Tadros, since he's the head of Underground Utilities, responsible for his employees, about a dozen of them went out to Fernandez's house that he owned with his daughter. She's no longer there, 435 Richview Drive, and they put in a new water line. They had a drilling crew to drill through a bunch of tree stumps to get to the house. Out there most of the day, probably cost $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. And how I know this is I've talked with 5 to 6, maybe 7 individuals who are out there working on the job. I think that's a problem. I think we ought to investigate that. Be fairly easy. You can talk with Rick Fernandez. It'd be good to get him on under oath and finding out. He might lie to you, but if not, he might tell you the truth, but at least we would have his comments. The second thing we would have, you could certainly talk with Mike Tadros because he's in charge of that department. And you could also call a few staff, and you'll probably find some that would be more than happy to chat with you. So, and I could provide some assistance in that. That was one house. He also, Mr. Fernandez owns a house at 3516 Raymondville Road. In this house, again, Underground Utilities sent a supervisor and staff to go to his personal home during the day, during a work day, and did work in the backyard. So usually it's the meter to the street. Well, they wound up in the backyard, in the pool house, replacing some busted pipes, leakage of pipes in the swimming pool area. So again, employees have confirmed that. Well, I think someone, it would certainly seem to be unethical. I think it's probably illegal, and I think it's probably criminal. But at least, if you want to look into something that would be, I think, important to show the corruption in City Hall, that'd be a good place to start. The last thing I want to talk about, and the evidence on this is already gathered. I came in here at the last City Commission meeting. I had about 30 people that were wanting to speak to the City Commission about Rick Fernandez. They were not happy with the $20,000 a month, the paid vacation. I called the acting city manager. I told him, here's what the situation is. These people want to speak. The City Commission only allows 30 minutes from the public to come in and speak about all issues that's included. If we go over 30 minutes collectively as a community, we all wait till the very end of the meeting and you speak on an agended item, but in an unagended time slot. I talked to the city manager and said, well, let's make this as easy as possible. I want to be as courteous as I possibly can. I don't want to have this group of individuals half talk early, the other half to wait 2 hours and talk later. So we had scheduled to show up to be there at 6 o'clock in that unagended time. and speak about Mr. Fernandez. I had asked them, the city manager, we certainly don't want people to vote if we wait until 6 o'clock. We don't want the city commission to vote at 5 o'clock if we're willing to wait till 6 to accommodate their requirements. I got here at 4:30. It's an agenda item. I'm speaking. I reminded the city commission that I have this group at 6 o'clock. It's going to be talking about an issue with Mr. Fernandez, and we certainly don't want anyone to vote until you hear the public. Unfortunately, at about 5:15, the issue topic comes up. Instead of saying we're going to wait until 6 and hear the public, our mayor said, I want to vote now. So they discussed it, they voted, and the public was here at 6 o'clock as scheduled to speak on an issue that he voted on at 5:15. Now, why is that important? It's important because we have a policy, 108.06, citizen participation. And it's very clear, the last line, it says, I quote, in all cases, official action shall not occur until after an opportunity to be heard has been provided. Now, we were given an opportunity to speak at 6, and then they voted on it at 5:15, even after I told them an hour before that this group would be here at 6. So my complaint is, I think it's very clear. The documentation is, look at the last city commission meeting. You'll see my presentation ahead of time. You'll also see when they voted, and then you'll see they asked these folks, there were 30 people here, about 15 was given a chance to speak at 6 o'clock after they voted on this issue at 5:15. That's kind of how the city commission rocks and rolls around here. So I think the mayor clearly violated his own statute, and whatever investigation is needed, like I say, it shouldn't be much, and I think we need to have a clarification to make sure that doesn't happen again. I appreciate it if no one has any questions.
Questions of Dr. Jackson?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, sir. Anyone else? Dr. Jackson, sometimes I can't write quite as fast as you talk, but I think I get the gist of it.
You got my phone number, call me.
With that, I believe we are done with this meeting. Our next meeting is Tuesday, December 19th Julie, there was something else we were supposed to announce. What was it?
We sort of skipped over number 9,
Oh, I'm sorry.
but that's okay.
No, I said, was there anything anybody wanted?
Oh, but there was an A and a B.
Okay, not on my agenda. Tell us the A and the B.
Okay, the A and the B is that Mr. Davis has talked about doing a My View for the Tallahassee Democrat, and we have worked up said document. The question will be the timing of it. So that is drafted, and I'm working individually with Mr. Davis on that document, and before it's sent for publication, it'll have a chance for the board to look at it.
Okay, so you're saying we'll have a draft in December, probably?
Probably January.
Okay, now, one question for the board's deliberation is, this letter is either going to go just before the city commission would vote on our jurisdiction or just after. Does anybody have a particular bias on timing?
Before.
Can you share with us a little bit about the substance of the My View?
The substance of the My View is basically informing the public about what the board's been doing since inception, the actions that it's taken, and hopefully it would be affirming the fact that the city has passed our recommendations. So the first introduction will be on December 6th. You could potentially arrange to publish the My View between the first reading and the ultimate passage on January 31st, or you could decide to time it after they've passed it, in which case you can say this is what we've accomplished, or they don't pass it, and then you can write about that disappointment. So the question is, do you want it to occur in that interim between December 6th and January 31st, or do you want to wait until after? So that's a question for the board members to talk about.
Ms. Phillips?
I think it would be important to, that it be published between December 6th and the actual adoption. I mean, that would be my recommendation, because that's informing the public about actually what is occurring, and I'd rather do it before the fact than after the fact.
Other comments? I'm seeing nods. I'm getting at least 3 nods up and down, 4 nods up and down. I'll add my nod. So I think we have a unanimous silent vote.
And we will have that on the agenda for the December meeting, which should be perfect, because they will have voted in December, and that'll give another approximate month, a little more than that, to get it into the newspaper. And
Okay.
I'll work with Mr. Davis on the draft.
Okay? Does that meet everybody's needs? Okay, that was the one thing I forgot. What's the B item on
The
number 9?
B item is that in December, we want to have a constructive discussion of our work plan for 2018. Much like the auditor, I like to develop a work plan for the office, and of course, I want to include board member priorities. So I'm respectfully asking each board member who's going to be continuing to focus on what their priority, and just bring it to one priority that you would have for the board for 2018, and then how you're willing to help in advancing that. So that would be working with that committee of one idea that the chair has, and an opportunity to work with me one-on-one on your priority. And then if you feel like you need resources to be a better board member, like if you'd like some ethics education outside of what I provide, or any other resources, a subscription or something you'd like to attend, let us know. But I'd like for everyone, with the chair's agreement, to just think about the one goal you would have for the board in 2018 and how you're going to help advance that. And for the board member who would be attending her last meeting, to perhaps have some recommendations, words of wisdom for the board.
I never pass up an opportunity to speak.
I appreciate that. So thank you for that opportunity, Mr. Chair.
Okay, well, and before I close this, I believe that our bylaws also say we elect our chair in December, do they not? We select the chair.
Yeah, so that chair will be fortunate enough
To set the agenda
to
for the
helpfully
January meeting.
set the agenda for January.
So that the chair won't actually chair the meeting, but will be in a position to set the agenda for January. So, fair warning. And with that, I've already announced, I think, or maybe I didn't, our next meeting is Tuesday, December 19th, 2017, 4 p.m. in this location. It should be the same group of us who are here tonight. And unless anyone has any other comments, I see nothing in the audience except gale of laughter. We are adjourned.